welcome to this poetry lesson on Rising 5. I don't even know where to start with this poem. I only read it for the first time maybe a week ago when I started analysing it, but I just decided it's like a really good poem. Like I really, really like it. I'm super into it. I just think it's quite beautiful and quite complex, and it's really nice. Like it balances kind of nature and art and spirituality and kind of humanity and our place in the world, and just makes you think so much about so many different things all at once. And it deals with it in quite a straightforward way to read as well, which is always very difficult to do. So I think it's like one of those poems that gives the impression of being quite basic, but actually the more you delve into it, the more complex you realize it is, which is always actually my favorite kind of poetry, where you can sort of get it straight away when you read it, but then the more longer you spend with it, the more value it gives you. That's always a good benchmark for poems, I think. So I've put a link to the full poem on this document anyway, which you can download from the Scribbly website. You probably have it already if you're studying this poem, but because it's a copyright thing, I can't do the whole poem here for you now. But I want you to read the poem aloud and just pause me for a second and just remind yourself of the imagery and the story and so on. And then we're going to move on to the vocab. So when you're ready, we'll move on. So there's not like tons of difficult words here, but the couple I found were kind of difficult. So dissected, if you do sciences, you probably know what this means anyway. It just means to kind of like cut something up, basically, to kind of cut it apart and analyze it so that you can understand how it works better. So you dissect plants, or sometimes animals even, in science, usually biology. And then tangential is also, it's kind of like a sciencey maths term. So a tangent in maths is like to do with straight lines coming off kind of a 90-degree angle. So something that travels in a straight line we call a tangent. So in this case, the sun's rays are basically like used to refer or referred to as a tangent. Another use of the word tangent in a more kind of figurative sense, so when we don't mean it literally, is talking. So I do this a lot actually. I just go off on a tangent. Like you probably noticed if you've taken some of my lessons before, I just kind of randomly go off on a ramble and I'm like, oh, I need to focus, that kind of thing. So that's a tangent, where you just kind of go off topic. And I think the word is used in that double sense here. So with double meanings of words, that means it's always a really good thing for you to get into your essay if it applies to the question. So yeah, make sure that you're confident with that word tangential, to be scared of it, and make sure you can analyze it in both the mathematical and the more artistic way. So we're going to have a look at the story now. It's actually a really short summary I've written of this one, because for me, it's like, even though it's not the shortest poem, it just kind of has like quite a simple central story to it, or a narrative. So a boy petulantly, kind of in this sort of confident and slightly arrogant way, tells the speaker of the poem that he's not 4, he's actually rising 5. This is quite amusing to the speaker, who's an adult, and it also gets him thinking about the eagerness of nature and new life to grow and quickly mature. So from an adult's perspective, we feel like we should slow down and take time to enjoy the growth process a little more. If you're studying this as a teenager, it's really interesting to think of your own relationship to time, because you're in between being an adult and a child. So maybe you're kind of similar to the boy, and you feel like, you know, you want to be seen as more mature than you are, and you want to be considered an adult already, and you're really frustrated with anything where people treat you as less adult or less mature. Or maybe you feel like you're too mature and you're getting old too quick, and you just want to be a kid still, and and it's all going too fast. So it's a very interesting poem for people at GCSE to study, because it's got that because you're in that transitional period. So so there's this double perspective, this double way of looking at it. As a child, you want to mature. As an adult, you want to kind of slow down because you're like, whoa, I'm maturing too quickly. Life is going too quick and, needs to slow down. So the speaker is standing in a field and he notices around him that this is actually how all of nature works. It's not just how this boy works, it's how every living thing seems to work on Earth. So it's springtime and there's all this life popping up around him. And he calls it not May, but rising June. Like nature can't wait until summer. It doesn't want to be spring anymore. And the poem ends with a reflection on the sadness within this attitude. So he is kind of, in a way, sort of funny and kind of, in a way, interesting that eagerness that young things have to become old and to be seen as mature. But in another way, it's quite sad because it shows that you're always looking forward to the next thing, you're always trying to progress, and you're not really appreciating what you have now. And if you kind of continue that attitude throughout your life ends before you have time to appreciate it, basically. So there's a mixture of kind of humor and sadness in this poem, and there's a respect for natural processes as well, and an observation of them. So hopefully that's all clear to you. We're going to move on to the speaker. So the speaker observes the little boy's confidence. So he's an adult. He might be the poet himself, he might be a character, we don't know exactly, so always just call him the speaker rather than the poet. But he's kind of amused at the boy's stubbornness, and he's also respectful, though, of nature and how it works. And he's kind of impressed as well that the boy wants to be considered older. So I'm not 4, I'm rising 5, I'm nearly 5. Rising 5 just means I'm like almost 5, or I'm coming up on 5. But yeah, he's saddened because of the lack of appreciation for youth and beauty. Like, he should just be really happy being 4. Why does he care about being 5? From an adult's perspective, even probably from a teenage perspective, there's not really that much difference between age 4 and age 5. So it seems strange that it makes such a difference to the boy, and so little difference when you're older. So the last lines kind of create this attitude that we need to appreciate the moment that we're in, otherwise we turn into not living but rising dead. So we're just hurtling forwards towards death instead of properly experiencing existence and what it is to live. So it's similar to that idea of like living in the moment, if you've ever heard that before, like appreciate your moment, live in the now, that kind of thing. We have quite a lot of different ways of expressing this idea. So a couple of attitudes then. One thing is that there's a massive difference between innocence and experience, which is actually an idea first suggested that way by a poet called William Blake, who wrote in the Victorian times. He's a really good poet. He's one of my favourites. And I feel like this is actually a poem that draws a lot on the Blake's writing. So if you're interested in this idea, or you kind of get quite energized, or makes you think this type of poetry and you like it, feel free to read William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience. That's a really good recommendation from me. I read it when I was a teenager and found it really interesting because it's all about the difference of how things feel when they're young versus how they feel when they're old, and the different kind of perspectives on life that come out of that. So in this case, we have the young boy versus the adult speaker, providing that innocence versus experience dichotomy. Dichotomy is a good word to put in here, so I'm going to just change it. Dichotomy, it just means like polar opposites. So when we're old, we kind of throw away our youth, and when we're old, we miss being young. Did I say old? When we're young, we throw away our youth. When we're old, we miss being young. There we go. Yeah, and then another attitude that's present is that the idea of nature and how natural processes work, and it seems that all of nature works this way. So it's not just like we're strange because we're human. It seems that a characteristic, a vital aspect to nature is that new life grows out of old. Old life kind of makes way for the new and encourages the new to grow. And youth has a way of pushing forwards and trying to grow as strongly as possible, as quickly as they can. So there's, yeah, the old kind of gives space and moves, and the new kind of pushes through. And you see this through generations of humans as well over time. Or if you have a plant from a seed and you watch it grow, you can kind of see that. I would agree that this is kind of how nature seems to work. So there's a lot of techniques here, and I've not actually gone through loads of techniques with you. I just wanted to talk about some of the main important techniques. So sometimes with these poetry lessons, I'll give you like every possible technique I can think of, and other times I'll just give you the main ones. And with those, you want to just kind of spend a bit longer and go deeper yourself. And the reason I do it is I don't want to give you, even though these are lessons where I give you all of my analysis and my thoughts, I don't want it to kind of leave nothing uncovered in the poem, because it's sort of boring if I just tell you everything I think and then you just use that in an essay. Like, you have to use your own brain as well, engage with it in your own way. There's loads of poems that I've read and I've wrote loads about, and I feel like I know them, and then I talk about them to someone else and they get totally different stuff out of it that I never even thought of. And I think that's really cool. That's one of the interesting things about poetry. So do that with all of your poems, and all of the ones that you take with me on this course. So with that in mind, we've got plosive sounds. The cells of spring bubbled and doubled, buds unbuttoned. It's almost difficult to say that line. There's so many plosive sounds in it. A plosive sound is the sound where you explode air from your mouth as you say it. So B, D, G, B, D, G. I think that's it. There might be another one that I forgot. But yeah, in this case we have B and D sounds, plosive B and D sounds. So it demonstrates the growth of life in spring and the idea of cell duplication. So as something's growing, cells kind of split and double and then they grow. That's how growth works in a scientific biological sense. So how new life is created. There's also this idea that flowers kind of pop open, so buds unbuttoned. And yeah, and it just, all of these kind of bubbling, plosive, explosive sounds, they sound quite violent. They sound very energetic. They feel very kind of like forceful and pushy, which is kind of relating to what we were saying earlier. But they also create this kind of like yeah, this feeling of like movement and growth, really rapid growth that you almost can't control. We have visual imagery, a lot of visual imagery. I've just kind of zoomed in on one in particular this time. The dust dissected the tangential light. So this is a scientific image, and it uses a scientific register. You'll notice again there's plosive sounds there, so this is an example of where you can go in deeper and do your own analysis. A register is when you're using certain words from a specific field of study, so in this case science, dissected and tangential, kind of mathematical scientific words. There's a semantic field of biology as well, so dissected, tangential, cells. So basically there's words to do with science and biology and many different words, so it creates a feeling of it makes us think of science, and it makes us think in a scientific way about what's happening and about this poet's exploration of nature. So even though poetry is an artistic, creative medium, it has a lot of crossovers with science and with other disciplines, and this is an example of a poem that shows that. So in this case, we have like the artistic, kind of beautiful side of what's happening in nature, balanced perfectly with the scientific side of, physically within the cells, they're dividing and that's showing growth, that kind of thing. So down to a very scientific level, this poet understands what's happening in the natural world around him. And he sees that as, science itself is beautiful and it is artistic and it is creative, which I quite like because I agree with that interpretation. So finally, we have this idea of symbolism. There's a lot of symbols throughout this poem, and it's kind of used constantly. And there's two really important symbols, I think, that I picked on in particular. So the first one is all nature and all natural imagery in the poem is symbolic of humans and life. So there's this kind of harmony between humans and nature. This is a type of poet who thinks that people are like nature. We're not kind of separate from it. We behave in the way that natural things behave. Um, and yeah, and he uses kind of natural symbolism to explore that. So we never see the sorry, what is that word? We never see the flower, but only the fruit in the flower. That's really hard to say. So we don't see the beauty of a flower because we're looking for the fruits of the labor, the fruits of the flower, the practical thing that we can use out of the plant instead of the beauty of the plant. One really interesting thing about this is like, if you try and think like, do you know what a apple tree looks like and a peach tree or a mango tree? If you go through like different fruits, how do they grow? How do cucumbers grow? That kind of thing. Like, are you even aware of that part of nature, or do you just like eat a cucumber or eat an apple? You know what I mean? It's really interesting. Like, I didn't actually start growing stuff until I was maybe 20 or something. It's crazy how long it actually takes for like a tomato to be grown. It's really mad because you can just go to the supermarket and buy a tomato, and it's there. But yeah, if you want to grow a tomato, it's going to take you months of work, and they might just never work and never happen for some different reason. So form and structure then, a few little notes here. There's an irregular stanza line length. I think this is to do with, there's like a kind of intentional order to the stanzas and a clear structure to the poem, like he's not just randomly put the lines, especially when he starts doing not four but rising five, not May but rising June. Those bits are offset, so they kind of stand out from the rest. so certain lines are offset from the rest. Offset is a good word here for structure. So it's very deliberate the way he structured it, but it's not regular. So it's kind of important that you deal with both of those things. You don't just say it's a regular stanza or it's completely crazy and irregular. So I think that's the idea that nature is kind of random and chaotic, but it does follow rules and it does have order to it as well. Like he's kind of copying, he's sort of embodying both aspects of nature there. We have a lot of enjambement with these phrases, especially where he's like not something but something else. We call that parallelism as well. So parallel, give me a second while I spell this one. I'm always really bad at spelling it. Parallelism. So that's like a grammatical repeated structure. So that's also a structural point. So not something, but something something. So not May, but rising June. It's even but rising, isn't it? So it's not something, but rising something. That's parallelism because it's repeated. So in this case, these things are basically the same, 4 and rising 5. You're 4 years old or you're nearly 5, which means you're 4 years old. So there's no difference really in what those mean literally. But in attitude, there's a huge difference. So if you're 4, you're comfortable with your age. If you're rising 5, I would never say I'm nearly 30. There's no way I'm going to be like, yeah, I'm rising 30. No way. I'll be like, yeah, I'm in my 20s. I'm not quite 30 yet. Like, by the time you get to my age, which isn't really that old even still, hopefully. There's no way you'd have this attitude. This is something that a young child would have. Maybe if you're 17, you might want to be considered 18 because that's adult. So there's certain times where you want this attitude, certain times where you would no way on earth say that you were rising 30, for example. So essentially, it's just a difference in attitude and perspective. So it's progressive and looking forward to the next step or wanting to be considered older. Sort of as if this boy is frustrated with how young he is and how little he can do and he can't wait to be big so he can do more. I definitely felt like that when I was a child. Maybe you did as well. So yeah, we have this repeated structure, not day but rising night, not living but rising dead. So he's taking this child's logic and he's actually applying that to different concepts in life, sort of to show us how human of an attitude this is, how even if we're not children, we maybe have this feeling like we're not living, we're just waiting to die. It's quite depressing, that ending. But I think it's depressing because it's supposed to shock us and stop us from fixating on that idea and stop us from letting life pass us by without actually being present in the moment and appreciating it. So I think it's like a reason that it's kind of quite silly and quite shocking at the same time there. So mainly the message is slow down, appreciate the moments in life that matter, don't look ahead all the time and try to progress to the next stage. Enjoy your life now, even if you're doing GCSEs in a few months. Take time to enjoy your life now and enjoy your subjects because while you're doing them, you'll be like annoyed and stressed that you don't have enough time and so on. But when you get older, if you're anything like me, you'll look back and be like, oh, I actually miss it. Part of the reason I'm a teacher is because I'm like, oh, I miss learning all this new stuff and studying and that kind of thing. So so you'll definitely miss it when you're older. So finally, caesura. This is when you have a pause within the flow of the poem. And there's quite a lot of caesura here, but one of the main ones was, again, a type of parallelism. We look for the marriage bed in the baby's cradle, we look for the grave in the bed. So this repeated sense of when this is going on, we look to that, and when that's going on, we look to another thing. The sense of always not being present. So the semicolon in this case, that one is your caesura. That's where you've got a pause, and also here. So there's this pause between different states, but then we go into the next state. It's maybe a jump in time, because we have this, like, when something's a baby, we're looking for when is that baby going to grow up and be married, and when there's a marriage bed, we're looking for, like, when does this turn into death, and so on. So it maybe signifies a jump in time or perspective there. So a couple of context points then, just to finish off with, and the themes. Did I do many themes? Oh yeah, I did. They were just on a different page. I was like, it's only 3 themes. It's not very much, is there? Yeah, so he was Nicholson was born in 1914. He's a working class poet. His writing is quite simple and direct. He writes a lot about the Lake District in Cumbria, which is a beautiful place. Definitely go visit if you've never been, because there's a kind of famous tradition of Lake District poetry, and if you've actually been there and you've seen it yourself, you kind of get more of a strong feeling of when you read those poems. Yeah, so you can see that it's simplistic, it's kind of respectful, it's kind of practical in a way. It's still quite very, very intellectual. It's not necessarily, you get some working class poets that are kind of anti-intellectual, like they wouldn't go into the scientific processes of nature and all that kind of stuff because they just want to engage in a more direct way with the world. He's not like that. So it's kind of, you wouldn't say that it's simplistic in terms of its ideas, because it's dealing with quite complex biology and science and math and that kind of thing. But yeah, you can see how there's those kind of wanting to express a complex idea simply, wanting to represent beauty in a very straightforward way, those types of things. The most important context that I can give you is that it's pastoral, and quite a few poems in the Cambridge collection are. So if you're doing that collection, make sure that you're aware of which ones are pastoral. Read about the pastoral genre of literature, because it will just help you like analyze them all in a lot more detail. So pastoral literature in a nutshell, it basically is like about the countryside, and it's about how beautiful youth is and new love, and how peaceful and simplistic life is if you just live in a little village and you're a shepherd or something like that. So it does explore all of those pastoral themes that we would expect, but it kind of has like a modern twist on those as well. A couple more things. Yeah, he was like a Church of England Christian faith, so it doesn't seem particularly Christian or spiritual in that sense, this poem, but given that the poet was a Christian, that would be kind of underneath what he's thinking. So even though he's very scientific and mathematical, he's kind of seeing that as an expression of God's work and an appreciation of God's work in nature. And yeah, and finally, I found this one interesting when I was reading about him. He never actually had children himself, so it's not his son he's talking to. So just be really careful with that. It's not him talking to his son, it's him commenting on how young people versus old people behave. So it's more of a removed perspective, as a comment on youth and experience, rather than him like a generational thing to do with his family. So yeah, we've got some themes to finish off here. I'll just put them all on the same page for you. As always with the themes, just have a look through, think about what is the statement on each one, what's the message that we're being sent in this poem. There's not tons of themes here, so you might find some other ones as well, like we were talking about. I'm just trying to think of one that's not here. I don't know, but I think there might be more. Basically, it's not like an exhaustive list or like a complete list. So yeah, have a look through that and see how you feel about what the messages are on each one and how the poem deals with each one. This exercise is going to really massively help you if you get this in an exam question, because the themes are always what the question is on. So that's why I kind of leave them half finished or unfinished most of the time, so that you can do that little bit of work and yeah, feel confident with them at the end of the lesson. So hopefully you enjoy this poem as much as I do and you found the lesson useful. Thank you for listening, and I'm sure I'll see you guys soon.